The story of the Mount St Helens eruption in 1980 is one of nature's most powerful and unforgettable moments. Before it erupted, Mount St Helens had been a quiet and dormant volcano for over 100 years. But nature had other plans, and in the months leading up to May, the mountain began showing signs that something big was about to happen. The first clues came in the form of unusual seismic activity. Scientists had long known that volcanic eruptions were preceded by earthquakes, but these were no ordinary quakes. Starting in mid-March of 1980, small but increasingly frequent earthquakes began to rattle the ground beneath the mountain. These tremors, while initially subtle, grew stronger and more persistent. By the end of the month, the quakes were being felt by residents living in the nearby towns of Washington state. The tremors were strong enough that people living in the area began to wonder if something more dangerous was at play. In addition to the earthquakes, other signs of volcanic activity became more pronounced. Scientists, including volcanologists at the United States Geological Survey, USGS, began to observe swelling on the mountain's north face. This was an indication that magma was rising beneath the surface, increasing the pressure inside the volcano. This swelling was the result of an accumulation of magma and gas beneath the ground, pushing outward and creating what is known as a bulge. As the weeks progressed, the tension surrounding the mountain grew. Local officials, aware of the growing threat, began evacuating residents from areas closest to the volcano, but the vast majority of people in Washington state had no idea how catastrophic this event would turn out to be. The concern was that Mount St Helens might be headed toward an eruption, but no one could have anticipated the scale of destruction that was about to unfold. On March 27, the volcano sent a dramatic warning shot. A series of powerful tremors caused a massive landslide on the north face of the mountain, resulting in a mudflow that swept across a 24-square-mile area. The eruption of debris and ash was a vivid reminder that Mount St Helens was waking up, but the worst was still to come. Scientists at the time believed that a major eruption was inevitable, but no one knew exactly when or how catastrophic it would be. These early warnings, however, set off alarms throughout the region, and government officials began preparing for what was to come. Residents living near the volcano grew anxious as they witnessed the increasing seismic activity. In some cases, buildings were damaged from the tremors, and the sky above the mountain was filled with an eerie glow from the increasing number of earthquakes. For weeks, the mountain had been signaling that it was about to burst, but what exactly would happen remained uncertain. People began to evacuate the area in large numbers, unsure if they would ever return home. The stage was set for what would become one of the deadliest and most destructive volcanic eruptions in United States history. As April arrived, the situation became even more serious. Scientists continued to monitor the volcano, and their findings indicated that the threat of a major eruption was becoming more imminent by the day. The frequency of the earthquakes continued to increase, and the bulge on the north face of Mount St Helens grew larger, a clear sign that magma was continuing to rise. The pressure building inside the volcano was mounting, and every small tremor felt like a reminder that the eruption could come at any moment. During this time, the US government and local authorities took steps to try to mitigate the threat. They declared a state of emergency, and on May 14th, the exclusion zone around Mount St Helens was expanded, forcing thousands of residents to evacuate. The National Guard was mobilized to assist with evacuation efforts, and the Army Corps of Engineers worked tirelessly to prevent flooding from the nearby rivers. With all this preparation, everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable. Little did they know that the events of May 18th would change everything, forever. As May approached in 1980, Mount St Helens continued to show alarming signs that it was ready to erupt. By now, the mountain had become a focal point for scientists, media, and residents alike. For weeks, the volcano had been shaking and groaning, as if awakening from its long slumber, but no one could predict exactly when or how it would erupt. The volcano's internal pressure was steadily increasing, and the landscape around it was beginning to change in dramatic and unexpected ways. The bulge on the north face of the volcano, which had grown steadily since March, became a major point of concern for volcanologists. This bulge, caused by the rising magma beneath the surface, was not only unsettling but also highly unstable. Experts feared that if the pressure within the volcano continued to increase, it could trigger a massive collapse, releasing an explosion of devastating force. The situation was becoming increasingly dire, and the danger was no longer just a possibility, it was becoming an inevitability. In the days leading up to the eruption, seismic activity reached a fever pitch. The quakes were no longer just tremors, they were powerful and violent shakes, rattling buildings and sending shock waves throughout the region. The mountain itself seemed to be trembling with energy, and the ground around it was becoming dangerously unstable. It wasn't just the residents of the nearby towns who felt the impact. These powerful earthquakes were now being felt hundreds of miles away. Amidst this growing unease, scientists were working around the clock to monitor the volcano's every move. Their primary concern was the potential for a lateral blast, a type of eruption where the volcano releases its energy sideways rather than straight up. This was a particularly dangerous scenario because it meant that the explosive force could travel across the surrounding landscape, flattening everything in its path. If this happened, there was little that anyone could do to escape the destruction. By mid-May, the volcano's ominous behavior had prompted officials to take even more drastic action. Evacuations were ramped up, with thousands more people being urged to leave the area. The government implemented roadblocks to prevent anyone from getting too close to the volcano, and the National Guard was deployed to help with evacuation efforts. Yet, despite the growing warnings, there were still some people who were reluctant to leave. Many residents, particularly those who had lived in the shadow of the mountain for years, were hesitant to abandon their homes, convinced that the volcano would not erupt or that the danger was overstated. But for the scientists and emergency responders, the threat was clear. Mount St Helens was on the brink of a catastrophic event. While the evacuation efforts continued, other precautions were being put in place to mitigate the possible effects of the eruption. The Army Corps of Engineers worked tirelessly to build temporary dams and barriers along the Toutle River, hoping to control any potential flooding caused by the eruption. Flooding was a real concern, as the intense heat of the eruption could melt the snow on the mountain, sending torrents of water, mud, and ash rushing down into the valleys below. It was a race against time, as the threat of an eruption loomed larger with each passing hour. Meanwhile, the growing volcanic activity continued to shake the landscape. Landslides were becoming more frequent, and the slopes of Mount St Helens were gradually being stripped of trees and vegetation. A few days before the eruption, on May 17th, scientists detected a massive collapse on the volcano's north face, which was followed by an enormous earthquake. This event was the final warning sign that the volcano's pressure was about to reach a breaking point. Everyone knew that it was only a matter of time before Mount St Helens would unleash its fury. At the same time, the media frenzy surrounding the eruption reached new heights. Journalists from around the world flocked to the area, eager to document the impending disaster. Helicopter footage of the swollen mountain and the surrounding areas began to fill the news broadcasts. People watched with bated breath as scientists, journalists, and emergency workers all braced for the inevitable. In the days before May 18th, some of the most seasoned volcano experts in the world were still unsure about exactly what would happen next. They had studied volcanic eruptions for years, but the potential force of an eruption like the one Mount St Helens seemed poised to unleash was unprecedented. Would it be a gentle steam release, or would it be a catastrophic explosion that could level everything in its path? Unfortunately, the world would soon find out, but no one could have prepared for the scale of devastation that would follow. The morning of May 18th, 1980, started like any other spring day in the Pacific Northwest, calm, quiet, and deceptively serene. But beneath the surface, Mount St Helens was preparing to unleash its fury. The seismic activity had been intensifying for weeks, but now it was no longer just a threat. It was an impending catastrophe. The people living in the nearby towns, though aware of the growing danger, had no idea that the eruption would be unlike anything the world had ever seen. At 8:32 a.m., all that changed. The earth beneath Mount St Helens rumbled and the pressure built to its breaking point. Without warning, the volcano erupted with an explosive force that shook the entire region and could be heard as far as 200 miles away. What followed was not just a typical volcanic eruption, but one of the most violent and devastating explosions in modern history. The eruption began with a massive lateral blast, unlike any eruption ever seen before. The north face of Mount St Helens, which had been bulging ominously for weeks, collapsed in a massive landslide. This was no ordinary landslide. This was the beginning of a catastrophic release of energy. As the landslide slid down the mountain, it triggered a violent eruption that sent a massive wall of ash, gas, and rock shooting out sideways at speeds of up to 300 miles per hour. The sheer force of the blast flattened everything in its path. Trees were snapped like matchsticks, and entire forests were obliterated across a 230 square mile area. The land was scoured clean, leaving behind a desolate wasteland. The intensity of the explosion was so powerful that it changed the landscape of the area forever. The eruption was followed by a massive ash cloud that rose high into the sky, reaching altitudes of over 80,000 feet, high enough to disrupt air travel across much of the United States. The cloud of ash spread quickly, darkening the skies and blocking out the sun. For those near the volcano, the skies turned an eerie, sulfurous yellow, and the air grew thick with ash, making it difficult to breathe. As the ash began to settle, it became clear just how catastrophic the eruption had been. The initial blast had been just the beginning. Over the course of the next 9 hours, Mount St Helens continued to erupt, sending more ash and debris into the atmosphere and creating pyroclastic flows, fast-moving avalanches of hot gas, rock, and ash that raced down the mountainside. The eruption's energy was so intense that it was equivalent to the explosive power of 1,600 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs. As the ash continued to spread across the region, it brought with it darkness and chaos. The thick ash cloud affected not just the local communities, but also areas hundreds of miles away. In Seattle, more than 200 miles to the northwest, the sky darkened to an unnatural twilight, and the air was thick with dust. Roads were covered in ash, and the landscape was completely transformed. The eruption was felt across the western United States, with ash falling as far as Colorado. It was a surreal, apocalyptic scene, one that seemed to stretch on for days. While the eruption raged on, the immediate aftermath was devastating. The shockwave of the explosion reached as far as the nearby towns, and the surrounding area was quickly blanketed in ash. By the time the eruption had subsided, the town of Spirit Lake was unrecognizable. The lake itself had been choked with debris, and entire sections of forest had been obliterated. Rescue efforts became nearly impossible, as the ash created an impenetrable layer over the land, burying roads, homes, and anything else in its wake. Communication lines were severed, and the region was cut off from the outside world. The most tragic aspect of the eruption was the loss of life. 57 people were confirmed dead, though many others were feared to have perished in the eruption's wake. Among the casualties were local residents, scientists, and adventurers who had been observing the volcano's activity in the days leading up to the eruption. One of the most notable victims was volcanologist David A. Johnston, who was stationed at an observation post near the mountain. As he communicated with the U.S. Geological Survey, Johnston's final words were chilling. "Vancouver, this is it," before he was tragically killed in the eruption. His death, along with the deaths of many others, was a sobering reminder of the unpredictable and deadly nature of volcanic eruptions. As the ash continued to fall, the volcano's eruption sparked not just widespread destruction, but also a deep sense of awe at the raw power of nature. What had once been a quiet and dormant volcano had now become one of the most violent and destructive natural disasters in history. The eruption of Mount St Helens had left a lasting scar on the landscape, but it also changed the way scientists would approach volcanic eruptions in the future, and served as a stark reminder of the unpredictable forces at work beneath the Earth's surface. The eruption of Mount St Helens on May 18, 1980, had forever altered the landscape of Washington state, but the true scale of its aftermath was not fully realized until days, months, and even years later. The immediate devastation left behind was staggering. The once thriving forested areas were now reduced to barren wastelands, stripped of vegetation, wildlife, and the towering trees that had defined the region for centuries. Entire ecosystems were wiped out, and the earth itself was left scarred, as if nature had been reset in an instant. In the wake of the eruption, the human toll was devastating. The loss of 57 lives, many of whom had been in the danger zone despite evacuation orders, was just the beginning of the broader, long-term consequences. Hundreds of homes were destroyed, and entire communities found themselves displaced, with people left to rebuild their lives from the ground up. The destruction of the timber industry alone was a blow to the region's economy, as vast swathes of forest land had been decimated. The ash fall, which had blanketed homes, farms, and businesses for miles, had further disrupted daily life, causing widespread destruction of crops and infrastructure. The environmental impact was also catastrophic. The blast zone, once rich in flora and fauna, was now a vast, lifeless expanse. The loss of vegetation meant that the soil would no longer be able to support agriculture, and it would take years for nature to begin the slow process of recovery. The ecosystems that had existed for centuries were disrupted, and many species of animals, including some native to the area, were forced to adapt or perish. Spirit Lake, a pristine natural wonder that had been a popular recreational spot before the eruption, was severely affected. The massive mud flows which had poured into the lake during the eruption raised its water level significantly and caused debris to flood its shores. The once beautiful lake was now clogged with ash, logs, and other debris. The volcanic ash, which had fallen over 11 states, also had a profound impact on both the local and national level. The ash cloud, which reached high into the atmosphere, disrupted air travel, forcing airports to close and delaying flights for days. It was so thick that it caused the sky to turn dark, even in cities far from Mount St Helens. On the ground, the ash created a choking haze that made it difficult to breathe, with residents wearing masks and trying to protect themselves from inhaling the dangerous particles. The ash also contaminated drinking water supplies, and it took months for affected communities to restore normal services. Many areas had to undergo extensive cleanup efforts as the fine ash found its way into everything: homes, businesses, and even the engines of vehicles, which caused mechanical failures and accidents. The economic effects of the eruption were felt across the Pacific Northwest, especially in the timber industry, which had been one of the region's largest sources of income. With vast tracts of forest destroyed, the timber industry faced significant challenges in its recovery. It would take years to restore even a fraction of the lost forest, and the region's economy was forced to adjust to the new reality of a world without the towering trees that had once stood proudly along the mountainsides. Despite the overwhelming loss and destruction, Mount St Helens also became a symbol of resilience and renewal. Over time, the area began to recover. Volunteers, scientists, and local communities worked together to rebuild roads, clean up debris, and restore services. Scientists, too, saw the eruption as an opportunity to study the rapid changes to the ecosystem and the rebirth of the land. Over the decades that followed, the landscape slowly began to show signs of life once again, with new plant species growing and animals gradually returning to the region. It became a living laboratory where researchers studied the resilience of nature and the ability of ecosystems to recover from catastrophic events. While the recovery process took years, the eruption also provided vital lessons for the scientific community. The eruption of Mount St. Helens demonstrated the unpredictability of volcanic activity and the importance of monitoring volcanoes closely. The disaster prompted changes in volcanic monitoring methods, as well as improvements in early warning systems for residents living near active volcanoes. The lessons learned from Mount St. Helens helped save countless lives in future eruptions and made the world more prepared for volcanic events. Though Mount St. Helens has slowly healed over time, it remains an enduring reminder of the power of nature and the unpredictable forces that shape our planet. The eruption was a humbling moment in history, one that left scars on the land and the people who witnessed it, but also gave birth to new opportunities for scientific discovery and environmental renewal. The mountain itself stands as a monument to resilience, both human and natural, and serves as a constant reminder that while we can never fully control the forces of nature, we can learn from them, adapt, and rebuild.